So, I want to make a video game. I like video games, but I've been dissatisfied with what's been coming out recently. I've got plenty of sources for inspiration, I have some background in Unity, and I've not really seen any indie developers try the style of game I want to go for, so I sense an opportunity. I know normally when pitching an idea, you should avoid using others' work for comparison, but words alone don't really stitch the idea together, especially if you haven't played the games I'm going to reference. And so, I'm going to cut together gameplay from those sources to try and illustrate the gameplay loop I'm going to be aiming for. Keep in mind I'm doing this solo, so my ideas right now may not reflect how things shake out down the road. Every good military operation should start with a brief of some sort. The type of mission and your objectives, the level of danger, and the kind of environment you'll be operating in will all factor into how you prepare before you drop. All missions would fall into one of two categories, either handcrafted encounters that are part of a quest chain, or one-off contracts which are generated, and if chosen would procedurally generate a level from a series of modules. The person issuing the contract will offer intel based on your reputation with them to further inform what loadout you may want to enter with. Once you're prepared and begin a mission, you'll enter according to your objectives. This may be an orbital drop, it may be entering the AO by dropship, it may be arriving on a ground vehicle, or it could even be walking. But similar to your client, the targets will have their own level of intel and may be expecting an attack. As the saying goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Upon starting the level, it's possible that your transport gets shot down, or that you get ambushed. If this occurs, you may start the mission hurt, with damaged equipment, or with fewer allies to help you along. There are two goals by implementing this mechanic. The first is to set the tone for the mission, and to prevent too much repetition from mission to mission. And the second is to give map generation a place to start, as your insert point will be the first room you're in a level. As for the rest of the level, it will consist of a number of modules, one after another. None of the main three sources do this, but the idea is that it would follow a pretty standard set of map design principles. If we take a look at any Halo campaign map, you'll see they consist of a mix of narrow linear sections, wider arenas for larger engagements, and then a handful of even larger arenas for vehicle combat. The level generator would have a bank of modules to choose from for the general map shape, with the contents of each module also varying. A sort of digital dungeon master would place and tweak combat encounters, loot, props, and equipment to keep each zone fresh and keep them in line with the original mission brief, similar to how dungeon masters for real tabletop games do the same. The goal here is to offer layers of randomness to give different feels to each mission, while not having a generation method so in-depth it becomes unwieldy and resource-intensive. The hardest part of this system won't be making it, but rather making it seamless so the player doesn't notice it. All of that happens in the background, though. It's nothing but preparation for the meat and potatoes of play, the first-person shooting of this first-person shooter. Shooters are a classic staple. I'm not going to go into detail about what an FPS game is. However, I will talk about what happens around the shooting and the mechanics of combat. So far I've used plenty of references to Halo, so this will be getting more into our other two sources of inspiration. Your outfit isn't a true state-ran military, and could instead be classified as a mercenary or private military company. As such, your supply lines are dictated based on what is available in the local star system and what your employer for a contract is willing to provide. What this means within a mission is that you're encouraged to loot for weapons, ammo, intel, trade items, healing supplies, and so on. You may need to swap weapons with a dead enemy until you can get more ammo, for example. What else happens is that your equipment can suffer damage. You'll need to keep your armor well maintained in order to keep any active or passive abilities you put in it. Some damage will be field operable, but otherwise you'll need to fix it between missions. As you progress through a level, you'll typically have some larger arenas where primary objectives take place. Starting out, these objectives will be as simple as kill the enemy, defend the point, or get the MacGuffin, but will grow in complexity as we get to that stage of development. Each level will end in one of three states: death, in which the player loses all equipment they invested into the mission; mission complete, in which the player completes all major objectives and is able to get a reward in addition to what they can carry out with them; and finally retreat, in which the player wishes to leave early, either because continuing will cost too much or because they found something worthwhile and don't want to lose it. Between missions, you'll be doing all the management aspects of keeping your outfit running: searching for jobs, keeping personnel staffed, researching new gear, buying, selling, and trading for the supplies you need, and so on. This is where non-material loot such as intel can be quite useful, as it's quite valuable and can be traded for supplies for direct benefit, or for a reputation to unlock more rewarding jobs. One of the main aspects for this section of gameplay will be maintaining and customizing your gear. This will be split into two parts: customizing the suit's chassis to fit any upgrades you wish to use, including passive upgrades such as increases to speed, strength, and health, or active abilities such as sensor packages, hacking tools, and target designators, and then customizing your suit's rig or loadout so you have any weapons, ammo, and other equipment you need to fulfill the mission. And then you repeat the cycle. Find a job, enter the level to shoot, loot, and scoot, and then take your spoils to keep everything running another day. As much as I would love to be able to do all those things, game development is hard and I'm inexperienced. As such, I'm starting small and working my way towards the larger scope projects with time. I'm not starting from zero, though. Around a year ago, during a brief stint I had working from home, I toyed with the first iteration of this idea, along with the idea of being a content creator and trying out streaming. It was largely a jumble of experiments. Its name, Blessed Poggers, was just a moniker to call it, because I'm bad at naming things, and I was inspired that one of the working titles for Halo was Monkey Nuts. Some of the things I tried out were rigid body movement, FPS gunplay, level prototyping, crude procedural generation, and learning the artsy parts of game design such as animation, sound, UI, and so on. Because of my background in Unity as that of a hobbyist, I never really produced a finished game. Like I said in the introduction video, something has just always gotten in the way of my projects. And in this case, it was that once I had to go back to the office, I was burning the candle at both ends. I couldn't do any development while at work, and once I got home, I was largely tired and just wanted to relax and play games, so I focused on streaming. That wasn't really a respite, though, as it just led to me staying up late, making me even more tired the next day. And the worse my mental state got, streaming to no audience isn't really a confidence booster. So I shelved both development and content creation for the time being, and did an assessment of what I really wanted. And the answer was to not have long hours, relatively low pay, and something that doesn't help me grow as a person. Realistically, I couldn't just quit. I still had a lease on my apartment for the better part of a year. So I just bided my time, did my research, saved money, and tried to think about how I would pull this off. And that brings us to the present. I'm going to be moving back home to try and fund development from my savings, and I figure that even if this project fails, I'll be learning practical skills that will help me work things out in the long run. Prior to the move, I have some time to prototype. The flaws of the previous iteration were many and very apparent. This go at it, I did my best to try and future-proof my early efforts. This is most evident in that I started the project with Unity's universal render pipeline, which, while not needed right now, does allow for more flexibility when it comes time to add art. The more tangible bit of future-proofing I did is the implementation of Unity's input package right off the bat. This replaces Unity's input.get button checks for an event system that can be used on multiple devices, allowing for easy coding both for keyboard and controllers. From there, I sought to improve the character controller from my original attempt with much simpler code that is better in almost every way. I used Dave's rigid body controller as the base for this new version, focusing on his first two videos on the subject. Movement is pretty standard, but the logic for aerial movement is vastly improved, and there's now proper logic for walking on slopes as well. There were some tweaks I needed to make, such as implementing stamina for sprinting, putting crouching on a toggle, and implementing better jump to give falls a weightier feel. From there, I figured out how to deal with the issue of rigid body controllers sticking to surfaces, which was actually a million times easier than I thought it'd be. From there, I went on a 3-day train of pain to learn about Unity's new UI system, UI Toolkit, and trying to implement a spatial inventory system much like Escape from Tarkov. What I wanted to achieve was simple, a UI grid that stored values and displayed an object. The method to do that was the tricky part. I don't have any knowledge of CSS, so getting UI Toolkit to work the way I wanted it to proved difficult. There just so happened to be a tutorial for something similar, but it required installing a package I didn't want in the project, and it seemed like going off book was not an option. I looked at a few different tutorials until I tried one I had been avoiding, a 2-hour tutorial by a Russian guy with a somewhat thick accent. It uses the old UI system, and there are some things I'll need to rewrite to make it more efficient, but honestly it's pretty darn close to what I wanted to achieve. That 2-hour tutorial took around 11 hours to actually put into practice, including breaks. But now that I had a system to work with, I sought to do a few things with it. The first was to have it accessible from the player's controller, and to properly handle inputs so you could switch between moving around and your inventory screen. The next was adding world space containers that store items. These could be crates, shelves, bodies, vehicles, or so on. For now, I just did simple crates. Along with this, I had to add a interact function to the player controller, as well as a script to the crate that would handle the displaying and storing of the associated UI grid. This works not by checking for the grid script, but for the crate's child game object. As such, it works with panels containing multiple grids. I tweaked the UI to make it look less awful, and to find a point where the chest's grid would appear. From there, I created an item type enumerator inside the item data because I figured it would be needed to implement specialized item slots. These slots would be equipped objects such as armor modules or currently equipped weapons. After all, you wouldn't want to have a brick equipped as an armor module. Trying to reach this goal, I added a filter to item grids as well, matching it to the item data enum. If the grid's filter is set to item, it will work just as we've seen so far. However, if the filter is set to anything else, it will only allow items of that type. It works fine at keeping bricks and bananas out of a weapon crate, but I ran into trouble trying to create a slot of arbitrary size. One of the main points within the tutorial to create the inventory system was to check the space an item would take up on a grid, but trying to skip that step ended up causing issues. And that's where my lack of formal programming knowledge has come through and has delayed that feature until next devlog. I'm already starting to see spaghetti code within the player controller too. I'm handling movement, input checks, the state machine, and so on, all within one script. I know this is bad practice, but simultaneously I don't know good practice. And so that's where I'll leave development for the time being. My checklist for next log is to learn and implement best practices to keep the project organized, use that knowledge to refactor both the player and inventory controllers, and in doing so, implementing a modular player controller, allowing new features to be added or existing features to be disabled much more easily, implementing player stats such as health, armor, and move speed, adding item slots that influence those stats, adding our first weapons, and then from there our goal is going to be creating a custom inspector to change the contents of an inventory within the editor, adding game objects to items, allowing them to be in the world outside of containers, and finally, adding in placeholder meshes and some animations so it's easier to show what's going on. I wanted to have this video edited before the move. That way I could focus on chores leading up to and directly after the move. In actuality, the dev time for this log was more like 1 week and 1 day, but I hope that the explanation of what I want to do provides direction going forward. If you'd like to support the channel and the development of this project, please like the video and subscribe for updates. I expect the next devlog to come out towards the end of the month. From there, I think I'll be able to pick up the pace and do 2 logs a month, but we will see. For now, though, I bid you adieu. Stay classy, guys and gals.